And we continue at 107 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Wangs at the sports desk in Culver City.
John, even though she is now facing a potential recall, Alameda County District Attorney Pamela Price is tripling down on not using enhancements.
Using enhancements has not stopped crime, and there is no compelling evidence that enhancements protect or improve public safety.
Except for when the murderer's in prison and he can't do any more murdering.
You know, I'm reading this book right now about tabloid television, and the crew that started A Current Affair in New York essentially got taken out by management at Fox, and then they replaced the people who are running Hard Copy, which was broadcast out of Los Angeles. And they said the biggest difference between New York and Los Angeles is that in Los Angeles, the only meal that everyone eats is lunch. Let's do lunch. How about meeting together for a 3-martini lunch? Let's discuss that over lunch. This woman, while she's not in Los Angeles, she's in Oakland, is out to lunch nonstop.
Quite frankly.
She is way crazier than George Gascon, and that is saying something.
It's also very hard to do.
Quite frankly.
800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a columnist at CalMatters. You can read him online at calmatters.org, and you can follow him on Twitter at Dan CalMatters. Dan Walters, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Dan, the last time you were on, we spent some time talking about the California budget, because the California budget this year is a bit of a mystery. We don't have to pay on April the 15th like we normally do because of the storms. So the state won't know exactly how much money they have to work with until October the 16th, because that is when everything is due, which means they're making a lot of assumptions. And those assumptions may be right, they may be wrong, they may be very wrong. We don't know quite yet. Right now, the working assumption in Sacramento is that we have a $32 billion hole in the budget. And their modeling does not include a recession, which may be on the horizon, as even though it's hot, we clearly have storm clouds lurking out there. In your reporting, you have recently talked about what Sacramento plans to do about this $32 billion hole. And based on my understanding of what you've been reporting, Dan, it involves a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, I guess you'd call it smoke and mirrors or gimmicks. It's, you know, I've been through a lot of budgets, like 50 of them in California. And whenever they get in some difficulty, a shortfall, a deficit, the gnomes in the Department of Finance dream up all sorts of ways of balancing the budget on paper. But, you know, rather than just saying we're going to spend less money because we have less money, we'll do this, we'll do that, do that. And so by the governor's own accounting, this deficit, only about 1/4 of this deficit will be covered by reductions in spending. The rest of it will be covered by these little gimmicks that have been used over the years. They're trotting them all out. For example, you shift spending from one fund to another. So it's not in the general fund. It goes to some special fund or a bond fund. So the general fund then doesn't have that spending in it. Some other fund has that spending in it. And so that helps the general fund be, quote, balanced, unquote. Another thing you do is you simply borrow money. They borrow money from some of these other funds and put it in the general fund with the promise that we'll pay it back later. But both of those gimmicks are being used. And then the other one is just called postponement. So you have certain things that have already been appropriated in the budget. And you say, well, we're not going to spend that money this year. We're going to spend it off into the future sometime. when we have that it's still appropriated. It's just we're not going to actually spend that money. So then you can subtract that from the deficit. So of the $32 billion deficit, about $8 billion of it is actual spending reductions, and the rest of it is these other the bookkeeping things that they traditionally do. The problem with that, of course, is that it assumes certain things. It assumes that you will have as many revenues as you have, that the deficit isn't actually going to be worse than you think it is. And the legislature's budget advisor, Gabe Pettit, says, no, it's going to be worse because you're going to be about $11 billion short on revenue from what you think you're going to get. So there's that. And then, of course, as you say, they really don't know how much money they're going to have until they count the pennies in October. So all this is kind of a mishmash. And then the administration, the Newsom administration's own data forecast deficits leading off into the future, basically for the rest of Gavin Newsom's governorship. They may not be $32 billion, but they're multi-billion-dollar deficits going forward, assuming that we don't have a recession and assuming that the revenues are what they believe they to be right now. And as I said, the legislative analyst thinks the estimate is too low. Got all that?
Yeah, well, as you read the tea leaves and you know the players involved, and we have a new Speaker of the Assembly, Speaker Rivas. Anthony Rendon, of course, was displaced by Rivas earlier this summer. We have a president pro tem in the Senate who is termed out of office, who will be leaving that post soon. And we have Gavin Newsom, who in many ways is an absentee landlord. He's looking at the presidency, and he sees California right now as being a bit of an irritant. Given all of that, what do you think their inclination is going to be when it comes to taxes? Because a lot of groups in Sacramento that have a lot of juice, the California Teachers Association, the Nurses Association, a few others come to mind, are going to want tax increases because they're going to look at any budget cuts as a threat to their livelihood. What do you think the odds are we're going to be looking at another tax increase on the ballot?
I don't think the odds are particularly high that we're going to have another tax increase, at least from the legislature. Now, as you mentioned on the ballot, it's possible that if indeed these deficits become more or less permanent, and if indeed the revenue system of California, as the forecast indicates, becomes stagnant at best, stagnant and maybe declining, then of course they're going to want more taxes, and we could see some sort of a initiative on the ballot to do so. It's happened before, obviously, and it could happen again. Now, Californians have not been terribly inclined to do that. You know, we've had some pretty hefty tax increases on the ballot in recent years. There was one to modify Proposition 13, for example, and the voters weren't too thrilled with that. They turned that down, and there was a income tax increase on the ballot that the voters turned down. So, would the voters go along with it? It's hard to say. Now, in the past, California voters have been willing to tax the rich, so to speak, by raising income taxes on the wealthy. But that may be that's getting to be kind of a uncertain thing, because in fact that tax base seems to be shrinking somewhat. People leaving California, and we're losing population, and a certain number of those people we're losing are wealthy people. I know several of my own circle acquaintances that have packed up and left California and gone to other states, Nevada or Texas, but they don't have income taxes. So, and even Gavin Newsom has said we can't do that sort of thing because people will leave. And Jerry Brown said that, as a matter of fact, at one time, saying he worried that people would leave if they raised the taxes on the high-income people even more. So that might, what tax would you have? Voters have rejected a property tax increase. The voters have rejected an income tax increase just recently in the last election. sales taxes are up to basically close to, if not the highest in the country already. What's left? Those are the big three. Those are the big three taxes in California, and it's going to be tight. It's going to be a very difficult situation if in fact this stagnation sets in the state budget. Not even including the possibility that there might be a recession. If there's a recession, then this whole thing goes really bad on California. We are very sensitive to those sorts of things.
I was going back and rereading what was written the last time we passed a tax increase statewide here in California. And the arguments were very similar to previous tax increases that we've had on the ballot. And that was, if you don't vote for this, public safety is going to suffer. The police won't be funded. The fire departments won't be funded. Your house will be burning down. No one will show up. You'll get hit on the head. No one will show up to arrest the person. And all hell is going to break loose. The other argument they used was schools. If you don't pass this, your kid will not go to a school that is high functioning with low class sizes where they're going to learn something. And I'm thinking to myself about the world that we live in now, where the defund the police movement is certainly very prominent in many big cities here in California. We have district attorneys who flat out refuse to prosecute entire categories of crime, including in large counties like Alameda and Los Angeles, and up until recently, San Francisco as well. And the schools were shut down for a very long time, much longer in California than the rest of the nation. And we were told by the teachers' unions that didn't matter. There's no learning loss. It didn't matter that your kid wasn't in school. They learned just the same at home over the computer as they would have on campus. And they wanted the schools shut down as long as possible. I'm thinking to myself, what's the silver bullet argument for a tax increase if suddenly you've turned on police and fire and the schools just didn't operate for a very long time? You can't say the schools are going to suffer because they see the learning loss that's already gone on in their household, and they see the attitude that our public officials have towards public safety. I don't know what argument you make if you can't ring those bells.
I don't know either. And I said there's one other factor in all of this. The other factor is that even though California may be going through a kind of a rough patch in terms of income and outgo, the majority in the legislature and the governor really want to not reduce spending. They actually want to increase it more. Yeah, I mean, they can't, as I mentioned in the column, they can't pay for what they've already got. They're using gimmicks to get through that. So how are they going to do all these things that they want to do beyond now? I mean, more complete health care, more complete cradle to the grave education, and all these free things that they really want to put in the budget. It's kind of an interesting thing because you have this frustration then. We can't pay for what we got. How can we pay for all the stuff we want to do extra? And it'll be an interesting dilemma as Gavin Newsom serves out the last 3 years of his governorship and deals with the legislature, because there's going to be a lot of angst over the next few years, a lot of fiscal angst, one could say, and if the income tax revenues this coming October don't live up to expectations, there's going to be a lot of bloodletting in the Capitol.
I was just on vacation, and the minute people would find out that I was from California, they would start peppering me with questions. And one of the subjects that came up a number of times was slavery reparations. And the takeaway from people outside the state is that Gavin Newsom promised black Californians reparations. That is what they believe. And you talk to people not just outside the state, you talk to people inside the state. Many of them believe that to be true as well. And I said, well, read an article about the California budget, and you'll quickly find out that that's never going to happen. He convinced people that he was going to do that. And the legislature and other electeds in California convinced people they were going to do that. As someone who reports on the budget, can you explain that that's never going to happen?
Well, it's certainly not going to happen to the extent that the Reparations Commission indicated that it would prefer it to happen. There, in theory, you can do reparations without putting out checks. There's other things you could possibly do, and that's what the governor has said. The promise you mentioned, it was an implicit promise. The implicit promise, he and the legislature created this Reparations Commission. So it's an implicit promise that if the Reparations Commission says these are the reparations we need, because they've already essentially said, yes, there will be reparations. Yes, we do need reparations. So yes, they have made this kind of implicit promise. But then what do you do? How do you fulfill this promise? Maybe this is a good lesson, and you should look before you should leap, right? And of course, the politicians are well known for leaping before they look. And so, yeah, this is one of those dilemmas. This is one of those things. You've set up the expectation that these are going to happen, and then you have to deal with the reality of trying to make it happen. And it applies to more than just reparations. It applies to things like universal health care or tuition-free education, or all of these things that causes that people want to embrace in California. Sometimes I say it's what they want California to become Sweden, basically. And yet now you have a situation as well, you can't pay for what you've already got. How are you going to pay for all these wonderful things you want, including reparations? How are you going to do that? Much less balance the budget you already have. And this is why I think the next 3 years will be very interesting as Newsom winds up his governorship, does something at the national level. We don't know exactly what yet, or something, and tries to sell himself as a visionary leader to the rest of the country. Is he running for president? I don't know. I mean, he says he's not. I put it this way. The guy spent half his life climbing up the ladder from commission appointee in San Francisco to the governorship. Is he going to pull the plug now and go back to peddling wine? I have a hard time believing that. Right? He's up to something, but he's being very coy. And I think he probably wants to run for president in 2028, probably, without admitting it. So, assuming that, he's going to want to sell himself to the rest of the country as somebody who did wonderful things in California. But he's going to find out, I think, that in his last 3 years, there's not an awful lot of wonderful things you can do if, in fact, those wonderful things cost money. And that's, I think, what's going to make the next 3 years very interesting.
Last question before you go. The Public Safety Committee in the Assembly voted down an initiative that would increase penalties for trafficking children for the purposes of contributing them to the sex trade. That received national attention. There was outcry. People were testifying and attending these committee hearings in Sacramento. They were furious over what happened. Gavin Newsom, oddly enough, sided with the Republicans on this one, sided with State Senator Shannon Grove out of Bakersfield, whose legislation it was. And the Democrats, including the new speaker, folded pretty quickly, save two of them on that committee. How much is Gavin leaning on the new speaker in private, and why do you think he's not doing it more publicly? It seems like he's letting them know when he disagrees with something that they do, but he's keeping the quarrels under wraps. He's not putting it on the front page of the newspaper.
That's one of the more interesting things that will also unfold over the next 3 years. Is the legislature and Gavin Newsom have not been very compatible. He has a tendency to want to basically force the legislature in its bidding rather than try to persuade them. And most recently on this package of bills, he wanted right at the tail end to, I'll veto the budget if you don't give me all these kind of bills. And So the relationship has not been really that cooperative over time. I think the legislature kind of believes that Gavin Newsom's using them as a foil to build his national reputation. And so you have a new speaker, as you say, you're going to get a new pro tem after a while. He prefers to do this thing kind of using leverage rather than persuasion. I think he and eventually the legislature itself saw that this child trafficking thing was a loser. It was a lose-lose situation politically. They had stepped themselves in a hole, and they had to get out of that hole because it was in an indefensible position. And they saw that and flipped over. I mean, Gavin Newsom saw that. He saw what this thing becoming a national bad mark on California, and the legislators saw it too. And I think the essence of that issue was that the previous speaker, Anthony Rendon, let committee chairs do their own thing. The new speaker, Mr. Rivas, is going to have a more centralized situation in which he's not necessarily going to let committee chairs do their own thing. He's going to kind of revert to the old model of the powerful speaker like Willie Brown and Jess Unruh. Other people, most people this time have probably heard of those people, but they ran with an iron fist, and I think you'll see Rivas be more like that and won't let committee chairs go off the reservation like what happened on that child trafficking bill.
Dan Walters, columnist for CalMatters. You can read him online at calmatters.org and follow him on Twitter at Dan CalMatters. Dan, thanks so much for stopping by. Always a pleasure.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And if you want to give people a reality check on the state of California's finances and by extension your finances, Randy, you can send in the podcast that last segment.
That's right. Go to KBC.com, click on podcasts, or go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe, download all the episodes, and at 2 o'clock when we post this interview with Dan Walters, you can send it to your friends.
I mean, it's not just about money. It's about damn accountability.
We really appreciate that. More people should listen to this show so we can make more money at it.
Coming up next, we'll have more sound from the MTA board meeting, including a doozy that for some reason no one's reported on yet, but this should be a headline all over the state of California. Right now we're going through the sound of the latest MTA board meeting.
Karen Bass says we're going to have a world-class public transit system. So I guess she's never been to Tokyo.
So this is the way we'll make sure that our residents, the millions of people who visit every year, and everyone whose eyes will be on LA during the World Cup, the Olympics, and the Paralympic Games. We want to make sure that everyone
Wait, what's the Paralympics?
The handicapped Olympics.
Para as in paraplegic?
Yes.
Is it only for paraplegics?
Yes.
What if you're quadriplegic?
I think they got a games for that, too. You do something with your tongue.
Okay. I didn't know that existed.
Yes. Whenever a city agrees to do the Olympics, they also agree to do the Paralympics.
Okay. Well, duly noted.
The Olympics and the Paralympic Games. We want to make
I thought she said pear like the fruit.
Different games.
Okay.
We want to make sure that everyone enjoys nothing less than a world-class transit system. Here in what used to be known, I want to say in the future, used to be known as the car capital of the nation.
Okay, so let's just revisit what she said there. All eyes are going to be on our transit system, and we have something to be proud of with it. And we used to be a car culture, but now we can all ride the trains because they're so fantastic. I know that Karen Bass wears glasses. So if all eyes are on the transit system and that's her takeaway, she needs a new prescription. And she better not take those glasses off anytime soon either, because it's fire season and those glasses will start a fire.
Karen Bass next tries to, in the most generous way possible, describe the ridership numbers of LA Metro.
So today, Metro operates the nation's second largest transit system with an annual ridership of 270 million.
270 million?
I mean, sure, if you divide that between every single day of the week and people using multiple bus and train lines throughout the day, it's really more like 600,000. But sure, let's go with the massive number.
With an annual ridership of 270 million.
That's how sales should be selling this show.
What if you die of a drug overdose on the train? Do they still count you?
Yes, they do. Until they peel you off the train, you're still a rider.
What if you die of a drug overdose on the train and jump the turnstile and don't pay for a ticket?
Karen Bass also is previewing some of the new expansions coming to Metro.
Metro is leading the nation's largest local infrastructure program, in large part because of public support that was expressed through Measure R and Measure M.
People, you got to stop voting for those things.
Stop it. It doesn't matter how they sell it to you. No, 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 no.
Metro is putting thousands of people to work, building an integrated transit network system, including our Crenshaw LAX line, the Purple Line extension to Westwood, a project that earned a personal visit from President Biden. I was honored.
Well, he likes a train. He's old.
He used to be Mr. Amtrak.
I was honored.
Why do you think we have the high-speed rail? Because Jerry Brown's old and he likes trains.
And he wanted a monument with his name on it.
I was honored to visit the project with the president and supervisor and Metro board member Hilda Solis. And let me just welcome our newest board member, Lindsay Horvath. Thank you.
Why does she get a shout-out? Just for being there?
Maybe she didn't like Sheila.
Well, nobody did. But maybe she gives Lindsay Horvath a shout-out because she's the one that takes the selfies when she takes the Metro from downtown L.A. to the next stop on downtown L.A. with her security guards.
She takes selfies everywhere. Did you see the latest one of her jumping into the pool?
I did. It looks like she just got back from Lens Crafters because those lenses get bigger every time I see her.
Well, that's not the only thing. When I looked at that picture, I thought to myself, what, is she looking for votes at the loading dock?
Well, let me just say that when you go from, a small city council salary to the $300,000 a year you get paid at the Board of Supervisors, you can pay for certain things. I'm not saying that she paid for those certain things, but it's possible.
Maybe that's where Paul Koretz went wrong. He should have put up a picture of him jumping in the pool because no other elected official has bigger breasts than him.
We have laid all of the track for the Foothill extension to Pomona, and along with local residents, we are exploring how best to connect. Remember I said along with residents. We are exploring how best to connect the valley and the west side along the Sepulveda Pass. So we finally have an alternative to our famous 405 freeway.
But she didn't say they were building it. She said, here we go, 15 years after they said they were going to start this project, we're still talking about doing it.
Well, it's good to have aspirations.
The one actual rail line that would take cars off the road if it was safe, they're still in the discussion phase, not to mention the years of construction that will destroy life for every commuter who has to take the 405 in the 10 to 20 years it takes to build this thing.
That thing will be held up in court when we're dead and gone.
But, of course, Karen Bass has to ask the pointed question, if we're going to do all this building, will they come?
Now the question before us, though, is if we build it, will they come?
No, this isn't a field of dreams. This is a field of nightmares.
Today, hundreds of thousands of Southern Californians depend on Metro to go to work, to go to school, to their doctor's appointments.
I thought you said it was hundreds of millions.
How many people live in the state?
40 million.
Okay.
Today, hundreds...
Actually, wait, now it's 39 million. I forgot we lost some people.
Today, hundreds of thousands of Southern Californians depend on Metro to go to work, to go to school, to their doctor's appointments, because Metro is truly an essential service. But for Los Angeles to thrive, in fact, for Los Angeles to survive...
There's Mother Goose.
She loves to rhyme.
But for Los Angeles to thrive, in fact, for Los Angeles to survive, in the future, Metro cannot be mostly a system of last resort. It must be a system of first choice.
Yeah, that's not happening anytime soon.
Never, ever, never, ever, never, ever, never.
We need more Southern Californians to view and use Metro as their first choice for transportation. The number of people who...
I mean, it's your first choice if you're filming videos to put on World Star Hip Hop.
I would go on those trains if I was Charles Bronson.
The number of people who choose to go to Metro will help determine the health of the air we breathe and the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere.
She's so nervous because she can't even sell this crap. That's why she's slipping.
Yeah, if I was reading something I didn't believe, I'd sound like that too.
It will determine the level of gridlock we experience in our daily commutes. And it will determine the ability of people to afford a place to live that's accessible to a job that can pay the bills. This is the monumental impact of the work Metro does and that we must all do together.
But it's time for the other shoe to drop, Johnny.
That's right, because we know that it's unsafe for people to ride. Not only do I know that, not only does Randy know that, but everyone else does too.
And the most people that are fleeing Metro? Women, which last time I checked is half the population.
Ridership today is up 16% to nearly 900,000 boardings every weekday, proof of the recovery, but still that is nowhere near where we need to be for the Los Angeles of today and certainly the future. We must acknowledge that ridership is still down, and the reduction is disproportionately amongst women riders who report that they do not feel safe.
Women are more liberal than men. Women are more likely to vote for bond measures that fund things like public transit. Women are more likely to have a more compassionate position on the homeless and on criminals. Women are more likely to vote for Karen Bass than to vote for Rick Caruso. And yet they're the ones that are fleeing en masse public transit. They're also the ones, by the way, that are all worked up over global warming. Well, if they believe all of those things, as the polls indicate that they do in Los Angeles, then why do you think it is that they are still not riding your trains? Because they don't want to get stabbed, that's why.
Now, Johnny, when we come back, Karen Bass shadow drops a number that is quite shocking. And up until this moment right now, I have seen nobody else report this because apparently I'm the only sap that listened to this speech.
When we come back, we're going to tell you what she had to say. This should be leading every local newscast in town, but I don't think anyone caught it but Randy. We're going through the sound of the MTA board meeting where Karen Bass said something that hasn't been picked up on in the papers, but she said something that is quite alarming and could be major local and national news if people paid attention. Randy, let's hear it.
Now, Johnny, at the beginning of this year, we had a pretty shocking number come out of Metro. It is something that made national headlines. Do you remember what that was?
Yes, we reached the same number of deaths on Metro by mid-February of this year than all of last year combined, and then they just stopped giving us updates on the numbers.
As of February, that number was 23. All of 2022, they had 22. And since then, they have not reported on the number. Until yesterday, Karen Bass.
And we must address the increase in human suffering that we have seen on our public transit system, like many other cities are also facing. Homelessness, as you know, is my top priority, and this is an issue of life and death. Almost 50 people have died on the Metro system just this year.
50 people have died on our trains and buses this year.
Well, she says almost, so maybe it's 49.
Almost 50 people have died on the Metro system just this year.
So we're over double of last year already.
Which is why they just stopped reporting the number. They know that if they report this number, people's eyes would bug out of their head like it's Roger Rabbit looking at Jessica Rabbit. But if they just don't tell us the number and they talk about what wonderful things Metro does, and Lindsay Horvath is posting selfies on the train, and members of the MTA board say that we need to flood the news with positive stories about the MTA, it's because they don't want you to know this. This is the truth. This is the reality. It's something they want to keep under wraps, and they want you to believe things that aren't true so that you put yourself and your family members in personal danger. This number should be on the front page of every newspaper in this city. It should be in the lead story of every news channel on television and on the radio. But if they don't report it, we can't report it. And she let that number slip. And because she let that number slip, we need to make sure it goes far and wide so people know what a true disaster the MTA is. And they can kiss each other's asses at these meetings, and they can praise their leadership, and they can do all of the things that they always do at these meetings. They have failed at their job, and their failures are creating a reality that will not allow us to use those trains because we know they're not safe. The poorest among us are the only ones who use it besides the drug addicts and the criminals, the people they claim to care about. They don't care about them. They don't care about the drug addicts. They don't care about the homeless because their official position is to let them die on the trains. And that's outrageous.